Suppose the mean GPA of students graduating in 1975 was 2.3. The registrar plans to look at records of students graduating last year to see if the mean has changed. Define notation and state the null and alternative. So the null is that mean is equal to 2.30. So it's either going to be D or B or F. And the registrar wants to see if it has changed. So now we're not talking about whether it has become greater than or less than. So change just means it's not equal to 2.3. So the alternative is this one, not equal to 2.3. Mean null always is equals. Given, examine the given statement. More than 27% of internet users pay bill online. Which of the following hypothesis tests? So we are trying to conduct a research that more than 27%, so percentage, you should use P. And the more than should be the alternative, because you know the null always has equals. So the null will have P equals 0.27. But this is not true because the H1 is saying less than. We are looking for H1 as more than. So this is the correct, because the null is equals to 0.27 and alternative is more than 0.27, greater than 0.27. Suppose the null is not rejected. State the conclusion based on the results. 6 years ago, 12.1% of registered births were to teenage mothers. A sociologist believes the percentage has increased. Which of the following is correct? So now the null hypothesis was that the percentage is equal to 12.1. Remember, null always has equals. So if the sociologist believes that it has increased, so the alternative would be that it has, the percentage is greater than. But eventually we are told that the null is not rejected. So it means you stay with this one. And what that means is that the sociologist who believes that the percentage has increased could not find sufficient evidence, because if he had found sufficient evidence that it has increased, then they would have rejected the null, but it wasn't. So there is not sufficient evidence to conclude that the percentage has increased. Yeah, there is not sufficient evidence to, yes, this one. There is not sufficient evidence to conclude that the percentage has increased. So you stayed with the null. According to report, the standard deviation of monthly cell phone bills was 49.88 3 years ago. A researcher suspects that the standard deviation is different today. The null is rejected. So if the null is, so the null was that it was equal to 49.88, and now the researcher suspected that it's different, which means it's not equal to 49.88. And if the null is rejected, it means this one is rejected, the equality is rejected, and it means that the researcher this time had sufficient evidence to support his claim. So there is sufficient evidence that it's different today, because if there wasn't, then you wouldn't reject the null. The null was equals. So there is sufficient evidence to conclude, no, it's not about higher or lower, it's about different. There is not sufficient evidence to conclude that the standard deviation, no, there is evidence. There is sufficient evidence to conclude that the standard deviation is different. So now that we've understood the concept As a quick way to do these problems, whenever the null is rejected, it means there is evidence for the alternative. Whenever the null is not rejected, it means there is not evidence. So the positive and the negative go along with what you do to the null. If you yes reject the null, then there is evidence for the alternative. If you don't reject the null, then there is not evidence for the alternative. That's the language we speak here.